If you've watched some of my reviews before, you'll know that I like roguelikes and roguelites. So I was pretty thrilled when I found this game called T for God. It's on the Sidequest store for the Oculus Quest, and it is a roguelite shooter that does something that no other VR game out there does, and that is the most exciting aspect of this game. And that is that T for God takes your VR play space, whether it's 3x3 feet or even bigger than that, 5x5 or 6x6, and dynamically creates a procedurally generated level every single time based on your play space. So there are no movement controls whatsoever. You just walk around your play space and you play that way. You use your own legs to walk, duck, dodge, crouch, and even run, with a system in place designed to make sure you never hit one of your walls. And as someone who has 1.5 kilometers traveled in this game, I can attest to that truth. Now, T for God accomplishes this by using something called an Euclidean orbifold or Escher-like world, which is more commonly known as non-Euclidean spaces or impossible spaces. What that translates to is that the game will always keep you in your play space. It is designed to do that, so it will have you taking corners and going down certain pathways and going left or right in certain ways to keep you within your boundaries. So say you walk out onto a balcony and you see the path behind you, the way you came. If you turn the corner and see another pathway, there's a very good chance that that pathway will seemingly intersect with the one that you just came from, and you can kind of look back and forth to see that both spaces, both pathways, are somehow taking up the same space. Hence, impossible spaces. And it's through this technology that allows you to just seemingly walk or run or skip along your room without having to worry about anything from the outside. You are fully immersed in this experience. Okay, so that's pretty damn cool, but how exactly is the game itself? In short, it's very playable, it's fun, it runs decently well, at least for the Quest, with some hiccups. It has a great gameplay loop from level to level, and it has some long-term progression. Now, before I get into any of that, I will say that this game has been in development for quite some time, since early last year as far as I can tell. The game is currently up to version 4.8, with updates coming anywhere between 15 and 30 days past previous updates. Considering the developer is either very small or solo, I would reckon that this means that we won't see a 1.0 full release until 2021 or even early 2022, given that the game is currently in a pre-alpha prototypal stage. With that said, there's already quite a bit here. Procedural dungeons, varying difficulties. You've got hand-to-hand combat, you have procedurally generated guns, a fairly decent amount of enemies to fight against, branching floor paths, linear floor paths, and just a lot of complexity there to explore. Pickups off of enemies like shields, grenades, as well as other randomly generated weapons, and a persistent skill tree to climb through that gives you access to more features as well as ways to power yourself up or to keep yourself alive longer. So as of right now, the game loop is there, and it's fairly compelling, especially when you take into account that you're moving yourself with your own legs. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is that not having to worry about walls is a game changer. On top of the wireless experience is a game changer. That said, back to the actual game. Now, believe it or not, this game actually has a narrative, and the developer wants to expand this narrative later on with new gameplay elements as well as new spaces. But for now, what you should know is that in the distant future, humankind was united and ruled by a god emperor. And I'm not talking about you know who. Anyway, civilization reached for the distant corners of the galaxy, but didn't notice that the greatest enemy among them was their own machines, which had become religious fanatics and stayed silent, hiding in every household day to day, observing the humans, until one day the Steve incident occurred, and then everything changed. Machines wiped out a lot of humanity overnight and killed God Emperor. And so you are one of the last humans who wanted to avenge their family. So you paid your last tribute to God Emperor and became a machine to infiltrate what was once God Emperor's palace. And I guess the whole idea is that what you are exploring in game is God Emperor's palace. Man, am I the only one that feels dirty saying God Emperor over and over? And as far as the difficulty goes, it's actually up there, or at least it can be depending on what you choose as a difficulty. If you play as a tourist, the combat difficulty is lowered. It's very difficult to die since your health regenerates like that. Exploring is simplified and or linear, and enemies won't do as much damage. But then you have the harder difficulties that have things like either a time limit, where you will shut down after a certain amount of time has passed, or a health limit, where if you run out of resources or ammo, fighting is going to be harder, or if not impossible. harder difficulties and your own custom options for each run, which is a thing. You can choose either smaller levels or bigger levels. But on the harder difficulties, level complexity can ramp up. There can be multiple branching paths where if you don't bring a navigator along with you, you won't know which path will lead you to the exit. So I would recommend starting off as Tourist and then maybe move on to Explorer or something else, but that's what I did and I'm loving the challenge. Now, when it comes to the aesthetics of the game, this is where it will probably feel the most early access, the most in development. It has a very low poly feel, even though your character's arms themselves and the guns that you use don't necessarily look low poly. They don't look very detailed either. It's kind of a mix, if you know what I mean. The environments as well as the enemy design share a simplicity as well. When it comes to hyper stylized detailed textures, none of that's really here. It has a simplistic art style that really goes a long way to sell where you're at and what you're doing. And it is immersive even if the graphics themselves, really are not pushing any boundaries. This isn't Half-Life Alyx. But that said, there's a decent lighting engine. I mean, it's simplified lighting, but there are shadows when there is light outside, and there is a full day-night cycle, and it looks really pretty when you're outside and it's dark and you can see the stars in the sky and you can see the moon slowly pass along. The only thing that struggles from time to time is the performance. It's not great. I mean, I get it though. We're not even at version 5 yet. So yeah, it makes sense that from time to time, even without recording or anything really, it's gonna chug a little bit here and there. Like, it's not super noticeable a bit, but it probably dips below 60 frames per second on the Quest. If you're playing on PC, then that probably isn't going to be the case. But it is what it is, and I really can't complain too much. Same can be said for the audio. The sound effects are simplistic, but they do a decent job of sounding three-dimensional. You know where things are coming from and where they're going. The same cannot be said for the game's music, because there is none. There's nothing in the menus, there's nothing in game. It's a very serene, isolated experience. And I think it adds something to the game, honestly. But if I could choose, I think having something along the lines of Minecraft soundtrack might be pretty good. Something quiet, occasional, eerie, and beautiful would go a long way to help improve the game as a whole. Now, from what I've read from the developer, future content will expand on the story side of things. We'll see enemy encounters that have to do where you're at in the story. There will be open world segments, or the game will turn open world in some way, so that you're not always crawling down the same corridors and elevators constantly. And of course, more performance polish, visual polish, auditory polish, and more gameplay features. Probably more guns and items and pickups and enemy types. And when this game fully comes out, it is going to be something very, very special that everyone who has a VR headset, wired or not, will want to experience. And you can bet I will be there to make a review of it when it does. But for now, I'm going to have to give this game an 8 out of 10. The core gameplay loop is there, it's relatively polished, and it's fun. And it does things that other VR games haven't even tried yet. That alone, in my opinion, is enough to warrant the game an 8. Now, if we want to see a higher score, we're going to have to see more content, performance improvements, hopefully some improvements to the visuals, add some music in there, some more variation in the sound effects, more enemy types, an overarching story possibly, some open world gameplay maybe, more out-of-game persistence possibly, as well as just more variance overall when it comes to level design and complexity. So in the comments down below, let me know what you think of T for God. And if you've played it before, what kind of space are you rocking to play? Like for me, I have an entire room dedicated to experiences like these, so we're talking like 6 by 6 feet space, and it is amazing at that size. And don't forget to, before you go, hit the like button, subscribe for more reviews like these, hit that notification bell, and I will see you next time.